Is up, trading addicts? Welcome to the weekly watch list. This is Jeff Kohler, aka Option Addict, over at www.tradingaddicts.com. It was a pretty good week last week, and that's because we were looking for a breakout of this range. We got it, got a little retest, got a little bounce. Net long into all of that worked out really, really well. Hopefully it did for you also. As I've been saying over the last few weeks, we're heading into trend mode. All the signs point to that. So in this kind of a context, until that trend fails, buy dips and sell rips. It should be just as easy as that. And that means I think you can play them both ways. And I tried to come up with a pretty dynamic list of stocks this week so that you would be able to do that. So I've got some decent bearish candidates. I've got some decent bullish candidates. I got a lot of patterns, so I'll take you through all those in just one moment. Right now I want to look at just a couple of things, though, in order to keep this trend up, which, from here we should see an extension that will continue to look something like this. It's kind of what I'm thinking. Futures are kind of pointing to that. Looks like we should see a higher open. And as this trend continues, guys, simply look to take profits once prices get a little bit extended. When they're up, look to short some stocks, maybe put on a hedge, cover them when they're down, and continue to buy dips. So that's just the trend that I think will unfold from here. But a couple things we need to see in order to keep this trend up. I think next week should be a pretty interesting and a pivotal week for financials, in particularly the BKX. The banks have been in this long-standing bearish downward channel, but in the context of this channel, you saw a higher low. And anytime that happens, that's usually indicative that that trend is getting ready to reverse. I'm not saying that it has yet. I'm not getting into that. I'm just kind of stating the facts here. If they do indeed break out, that will be the turning point here. So you might want to keep an eye on stocks like U.S. Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Normally I don't want to get anywhere near those stocks, but if indeed the BKX does see a little bit of move out from here, maybe gets up and tests a 200-day moving average, you're probably going to see those bank stocks move, 4, 5, 6% this week. So keep an eye on that. The banking index, BKX, got a lot of focus on that this week. As I do transports and REITs, I want to see transports break out of this range, which they haven't yet. Normally they're one of the first to go. They haven't. Semiconductors look good. They've traded back into their range. Housing stocks have stopped going down. That looks pretty good. But transports, I think they need to break here. And last but not least, something's got to be said about this crude oil. I posted a chart last week on Option Addict that showed the divergences that have occurred in the last year between copper and crude oil. And in every instance, it's been crude oil that plays catch up. And with that being the case, with that being kind of the historical setup here, I want to keep a close eye on crude this week, which means we might be able to see some decent plays in energy stocks, and I got a couple of those that we'll look at. But you'll see this bigger consolidation pattern through here, right? This bigger triangle pattern. If prices can start to get back up above, let's say 77.5 or so, then you might see a pretty sharp, dramatic increase on up to maybe 80, 82. Kind of like they did back through here last time. You saw they just kind of slowly lifted and then pulled back a little bit and then pop, right? Same setup here. Prices have been on a buy signal, flipped onto a sell signal earlier in the week, and then popped back up. I think they might see a little bit upside this week. If they do, we'll play some energy stocks. If not, I have no interest in energy whatsoever, only if crude oil moves first. So getting back to the setups this week, guys, like I said, I can play them both ways, but let's first start off with a couple of buy the dip candidates, sell the rip candidates, and my favorite, my $10 darlings. Take a look. All right, so let's get down and dirty into some price patterns. Solar stocks have been hot. I happen to own a little bit of Trina Solar right here, but I'm also watching this JKS, Jinko Solar. It's coiled up pretty tightly. I think if this stock gets back up above about 31 or so, it'll get pretty explosive, so keep an eye on that. It's a pretty big mover. Some of the automotive-related stocks like AutoNation, AN, have coiled up into a nice little triangle pattern, as have ARM, which actually saw a nice breakout with some really heavy volume. AXL and TRW. Watch those this week. They all look really good to me. Others I like, PRAA, which isn't the most liquid stock around, but hey, if you want to buy some shares or something that might see a little breakout later this week or into next week, take a look at PRAA. Looks real nice. One of my favorites this week is YGE. I bought some shares of this on Friday last week, but I'm thinking about maybe selling those at a little profit and rolling into some call options instead and going for the leverage route. Because I think if this thing gets up and closes above this 200-day moving average, which it's rejected multiple times in the last 6 months, it'll be a pretty explosive move on up into the $13 range. So YGE I think looks pretty good. I also like the bull flag here in Children's Place. Also looks like a pretty reasonable dip buying candidate for a stock that should see a pretty decent and strong breakout north of 50. I can't say that I don't like the look of OHI here. Volume's a little bit on the uptick. It's getting up towards its recent reference highs. Doesn't look too bad. This little BSBR, I had this on my list last week. Saw some pretty decent volume here. It's coiled up all nice and tight. That thing should see a nice little break. I mentioned energy. Hard not to like XTEX with some of the volume that's gone on in there last week. Let's go over into Stone Energy, SGY. Just kind of doing the same thing, getting up towards its relative highs through here. ATPG, which I happen to own some calls in, just FYI. And BEXP, which broke out of a multi-month consolidation range here this week. Last few that I like, LOGI, CRUS, SID, and that's it. Yeah, that's all of them. That's my list this week. And so I tried to make sure that the bearish list, the sell the rip candidates, is pretty dynamic. So if you're a little bit more bearish here, which I'd be careful, I think it's going to take a decent catalyst to get this market to go down a lot. But there are some decent looking plays in there, in my opinion. So that'll be about it for me, guys. As always, you can find me over at www.tradingaddicts.com. Hope to see you there. In the meantime, this is the Option Addict. That's been my weekly watch list. Thanks for watching. Have a good week.